My story begins that my belief was finally confirmed on a trip that my wife and I took to the Jefferson Hotel in Jefferson, Texas in September 2003. This town is very unique and small and has a very historical feel to it. Every building has a historical marker dating back to the 1800s. The town has a sprawling history dating back to the 1800s when steamboat travel was very popular off the Mississippi River into the bayou and one of the main means of transportation at the time. This town has also the reputation of being one of the most haunted towns in Texas and the United States. We really did not know anything about Jefferson, but we were told through an acquaintance that the hotel in town had a haunted history. I really wanted to confirm my belief and acquire good evidence of the paranormal spirit world. I've always believed that ghosts are indeed spirits or entities of people who for some reason have not passed to the other side, that they are stuck in limbo between the physical dimension world that we live in our physical state, and the spiritual world that we pass on to. We traveled from San Antonio, Texas to the Jefferson Hotel, which is about a 440-mile trip. We arrived on a Friday afternoon and planned on staying 3 days and nights. We had booked 3 different rooms in the hotel that were rumored to be very haunted. All these rooms had recent paranormal activity in them. The hotel was very plain looking from the outside, but the inside was very exquisite due to the way they had decorated with many antique pieces of furniture spread around the hotel. All the rooms are decorated differently to where you feel like you're in another hotel. The hotel has, I believe, 23 rooms that you can stay in, and about half of those are rumored to be haunted by spirits. I had heard a story that a psychic had once ventured into the hotel and said that there were 7 spirits in the hotel. For our first night, we stayed in room 6. The room was very quaint. It had a queen-size bed in it, along with an antique tub that stood by itself in the bathroom. At first, nothing happened, which dampened my hopes, but then at 11:30 p.m., things started to happen. However, they only happened to myself. We were lying in bed with the lights off and the television on. The television was located on a dresser at the foot of the bed facing us. I was lying on the side of the bed, closest to the one window in the room. There was enough distance between the bed and the wall for someone to walk. I had exposed my right arm, resting along my side and slightly off to the side of the bed. Suddenly, something began to pull the hairs on my arm. I felt an electrical sensation, such as that when you acquire static electricity. I looked down in disbelief, but I could not see anything. I then nudged my wife and told her what was happening to me. She started to laugh, thinking that I was trying to scare her or something. Just then, while she was talking, I felt a small woman's or girl's hand and fingers drag itself all the way up my arm, from the tip of my fingers to almost my shoulder. It felt like a woman because it was a small hand. This really got my attention. I then jumped out of bed, telling my wife what had just happened. She of course could not feel or see anything, and thought I was making up the whole situation. I then had the feeling that someone was standing in the corner, between the bed and the wall, staring at us. I had the distinct feeling that the ghost was a woman or girl, because it seemed to be small and unobtrusive. This lasted for about 5 minutes, and then it stopped with me no longer having the feeling that the ghost was in the room with us. I remember it upset me that my wife was not encountering anything. Nothing else happened that night, even though I had expected it to. The next morning we moved across the hall to room 12, which had a very grandiose king-side poster bed in it. The room was also quite larger than room 6. I really was waiting for the opportunity for something to happen so that I could look at researching it more. I have to admit that I've been slightly alarmed from my experience in room 6. Well, nothing happened in room 12, but something did later happen that night in the hallway just outside. I had become bored watching television with my wife and decided to go out into the hallway around 1 a.m. that night. I ended up sitting in an antique couch that is at the end of the hallway, pushed up against a door that goes out into the front balcony. The hotel was working on the balcony and had locked the door and pushed the couch up against it to block the door. The door had a glass pane that covered approximately the top half of the door, enabling a person to be able to stare outside into the main street or the buildings across the street. Well, the street was very dark and there was no activity at all in the street. It was very quiet at the time. I kept hearing noises in the hallway every time I looked down or away. It was strange that noises would happen only if I was not directly staring down at the hallway at the time. The hotel is very long, front to back, and narrower in width. At one point, I heard a noise down the hallway and looked down with nothing happening or being seen. Then I heard a noise outside and looked again to see nothing. I then heard the noise down the hallway again and turned to look. When I did this, something then knocked the glass behind me with 3 taps suddenly. I admit that I jumped about 3 feet because it startled me so badly. When I turned around to look, there was nothing there. I walked back to the window and the door and looked out again. Again, I did not see anything at all. I then went to get my wife and told her to sit on the couch a few minutes to see if anything would happen. Of course, she came back in after 10 minutes and told me that nothing had happened to her. This again was very frustrating to me because I began to think that the spirits were only trying to communicate with me. Nothing else happened that night, and we went to bed. The next day we moved into room 19, which is rumored to be one of the most haunted rooms in the hotel. The maids were in the hallway as I walked down to put our bags in the room. Room 19 sits in the upstairs hallway, all the way to the rear on the left side of the hallway. The maids began to tell the story of room 19. They said that a blonde lady spirit haunts the room and that the bathroom is haunted. When a person goes into the bathroom, you are supposed to run the hot water in the bathtub and the sink at the same time, and then close the door and turn out the light. The spirits are supposed to turn off the water sometimes, and you are supposed to be able to see the words in the mirror when you go back in and turn on the light. As the maids were telling me the story in the hallway, a woman suddenly stepped out of one of the rooms adjacent to room 19. This woman began to tell me that her friend had stayed in room 19 the previous night, and that they had brought a Ouija board with them. She told me that they had been trying to summon the spirits of the hotel. They had asked the board if there was a spirit that haunts the room, and what the spirit's name was. She said that the board had told them that yes, there was a spirit, and the spirit's name was Laura, which I had spelled out. When the board had stopped, the woman's friend had been lying on her stomach on the bed, watching the other 2 people on the floor do the board, when something suddenly grabbed her exposed legs from behind and pinned her down to the bed for a few seconds. The woman had not been able to move and was terrified by this. Later that night, the woman had grabbed her pillow and blanket and went downstairs to spend the rest of the night with the desk clerk that was there all night. Apparently, other things happened to the woman in the room to make her want to do this from what the woman explained to me. This really got my attention, and I could not wait to conduct our research of room 19. We also were the only guests in the hotel that night, and the desk clerk went home around 9 p.m. My wife and I ended up doing the bathroom thing right away. When we first went into the bathroom, there was nothing in the mirror over the sink, and the bathroom was very clean. I then turned on the hot water in the bathtub and sink, turned off the light, and closed the door. Well, the water never quit running, and after about 3 or 4 minutes, I went back into the bathroom and turned on the light. My eyes were in amazement at the words that had suddenly appeared in the mirror. The mirror had been steamed up by the hot water, but the words were very clear in a sort of film on the mirror. The words read "Help, Judy, help," and the word "murder" was written backwards in the mirror on the bottom. At first, I thought this was a joke, and I had my wife come in and smear the film on the mirror with her fingernails to where it was literally smeared all over the mirror. I felt that if there was some kind of chemical on the mirror, that it would be smeared the next time we did the experiment. Again, I went through the process, and again, the water never shut off or anything while we waited. When I went back in, I was truly amazed. The words had appeared in the mirror, exactly as they appeared before, without any distortion at all. This really freaked us out, and I really had the feeling something paranormal was taking place there in that room. We had decided to stay up late into the night, since we would be alone in the hotel that night. We asked the desk clerk to unlock most of the rooms in the hotel, so that we could walk into any of them should we hear or see something. The desk clerk did this, and we followed around as she did this. When she got to room 6, the room we stayed in on our first date, she put the master key in the lock and unlocked the door. She then began to push on the door, and it would not open or budge. I was standing about 15 feet behind her, watching her, and she pushed on the door and got a scared look on her face. She said, oh no, not again." I then began to walk towards her and asked what was wrong. When I got up to her, the door suddenly opened. We all stared at the open door in disbelief. I then walked into the room, but I saw nothing or felt anything out of the normal. The desk clerk then left shortly after that. My wife and I decided around 1 a.m. to sit in a couch in the middle of the upstairs hallway and wait for things to happen. Of course, nothing did, since we were sitting there prepared for anything. I then got up and decided to go downstairs to the lobby. When I was in the lobby, I had the distinct impression of being watched by more than one person, and I kept turning around to look, expecting someone to be standing there. I got this really weird feeling, and I decided to go back upstairs. When I got upstairs, I decided to go into room 14, which has a bed rumored to be haunted in it. This is a queen-size bed with an ornate, sculpture wood headboard that goes almost to the ceiling. The bed is actually kinda spooky the more you kinda look at it. I did not turn on the light when I went in, because the hallway light was bright enough under the door for me to see. When I got into the room, I immediately got a chill from the room. Something then seemed to draw me to the bed. For some reason, I went and sat down on the edge of the bed. Nothing at first happened, but then the bed suddenly began going up and down, as if someone were pushing on the mattress underneath me. It felt like the mattress were breathing, as if a person were lying on the bed, breathing heavily. This really alarmed me, because beds are not supposed to do this, per the realm of science. I asked if my wife come in the room and sit on the bed. I remember my wife saying when she entered the room how cold it was. She did lie down on the bed and said that it was really cold on the bed, but she did not feel anything. She did not lie there that long. We both went back outside in the hallway. I had the feeling that spirits were around us, watching us, even though nothing else happened that night. The next morning, I got up around 9 a.m. before my wife did. I ended up sitting in the rocking chair in the room. I started to read a journal of other people's experiences in the room of the hotel. The hotel lends itself to patrons if you're interested in seeing what other people have seen. I decided to do the bathroom test one more time, for old time's sake, to see if anything else would happen. I went in and did the same thing. At first, nothing happened, but then, when I sat back in the rocking chair, I could hear physically the water faucets turn off slowly on both the bathtub and sink. I then waited to see if I could hear anything else. There was this very eerie silence in the room, except for the breathing of my wife sleeping in bed. Suddenly, a woman's voice began to moan over and over the words "oh," which sounded like a broken record, repeating itself over and over. This did not sound sexual either, as some people may think in reading this. It actually sounded very sad, and it was not very fast. This sound, or voice, was kinda loud, but it did not wake my wife. I was too startled at the time to wake my wife. My curiosity was in trying to figure out exactly where the sound was originating. I looked around the room in all directions, and finally decided the noise was coming from behind the window shade by the window. I walked over, and the noise did seem to get louder there. As I stood by the window, the sound seemed to be coming from behind the shade, between the shade and the closed window. The sun was shining outside, but since we had the shade pulled down, the room was kinda dark and gloomy with only one light on. I then reached for the shade and pulled it back. When I did this, the sun then entered the room. As this happened, the water faucet suddenly turned again, and the water came back on in the bathroom. The woman's voice also suddenly stopped. I then walked over to the bathroom in disbelief at what just happened. I looked in the bathroom, and it was very cold in there, with the same steamy words in the mirror. I then went back to my wife and woke her up screaming and told her what just happened. Again, she looked at me in shock and disbelief. I was indeed very frustrated that I had not woken her up to hear what I had heard. It definitely would have gotten her attention. About a half hour later, we were putting our stuff together to leave. My wife was in the bathroom, and I was putting my contact lenses in, using the mirror in the room. I remember having all sorts of problems trying to do this because something kept knocking the lens off my finger. My wife screamed, "Look," and I turned around. The light was swinging back and forth from the ceiling as if someone had grabbed it and swung it. My wife was so happy that she had finally experienced something. My wife had also asked the spirit earlier, when we got into room 19, if it would swing the light at some time to acknowledge its presence in the room, and that the female spirit knew we were there. Spirit had answered our request. My name is Jamie. It was late May, and I was at my friend's, Anna's birthday party. It was a sleepover. Around 5 or 6 giggling girls showed up for a night of pizza and movies. Although we were all excited and jumpy from eating pizza and consuming vast amounts of pop and ice cream, I decided I would turn in, as I was really tired, and they were watching a movie I didn't really enjoy much. They were all in the TV room, just down the hall, and to the right, from where I had set my sleeping bag in the family room. The floor was hard, and I was uncomfortable, but I tried my best to drift off. I was closest to the dining room, which was an extension to the family room, and ended in a dead end. I'd stretched myself right in front of the entrance, so there was no possible way anyone could get into or out of the dining room without stepping over me. Also, once they had stepped past me, there was no way out again without stepping over me a second time. I sat up for a moment because I thought I heard someone breathing. I looked around the room, but it was empty. Across the hall, the basement door was slightly ajar, and I heard my friends laughing and talking in the TV room. I sighed and lay back down, finally able to close my eyes. I awoke only minutes later to a thud in the room. It sounded as though someone with heavy boots was deliberately stomping on the floor towards me. I assumed it was Anna or one of the other girls trying to scare me. I heard them stomp to the edge of my sleeping bag and step over me. Whoever it was, they were clumsy because they stepped on my arm and a few strands of my hair, causing me to wince in pain. I heard the boots stomp to the corner of the dead-end dining room and stop. As I said before, there was no way a person could go into the dining room and then step back out without having to walk over me, and, judging by the person's boots, they would make a lot of noise doing so. I opened my eyes and was startled. No one was in the dining room, behind the table, or under the chairs. In fact, the whole living room area was empty and silent, except for my heavy breathing. At that, I picked up my pillow and bolted towards the TV room, where my friends had fallen fast asleep, the movie credits rolling by, lighting the room a faint blue. I laid down, far as I could from the hallway, and after stealing a blanket from a sleeping Anna, fell asleep. I wrote previously about the place I work and all the ghostly happenings there. Up until now, I've not seen a full apparition, only shadowy figures and strange sounds. The other night, myself, my assistant, I will call her Amy, and a maintenance guy, Robert, were working in the area where most of the activity occurs. It was 11:30 p.m. and we decided to take a smoke break. I need to explain the layout of the building for this to make sense. Our building is smoke-free, so we have to go outside to a smokehouse. In order to get there, there's a long tiled corridor, about 50 feet long, leading to the door. There are no fences or areas along the corridor. The three of us headed to the smokehouse and exited the heavy safety door. Amy was first, I was second, and Robert was last. Just as Robert came through the door, Amy turned and gave a startling scream. I turned, and right behind us was a woman. What made her appearance so shocking was we had not seen anyone walking behind us down the corridor, and there was no place for her to have come out of. Also, as she walked on the blacktop, there was a loud, sharp clicking of her high heels. I fell back against the wall of the building and was speechless as she walked by. What scared me the most was one, her clothing. She dressed in all black. Black skirt, shoes, coat, gloves, and a large 1940s style hat with a veil covering half her face. And two, where did she come from? And why did she not acknowledge us? Amy had screamed, and yet she did not turn her head, look at us, or acknowledge us at all. After she had walked by us to the parking lot, I told Robert to see if she got into a car. I ran after her, but within 10 seconds of us seeing her, she was gone. Needless to say, we were all pretty shaken up that night. The next day we scouted the building for a woman who matched that build and asked people if they knew of someone who wore that style of hat. Everyone said no. This is not the first supernatural occurrence in this building, but it is the most intense to date. I should add that one of our old employees said our description of this woman sounds like the founder's wife. She died in 1957. Needless to say. I'm saying needless to say because every story and every story of every story of every story of every story says needless to say. I think it's a really fun word to say. Needless to say. Needless to say. It's not needy to say needless to say because you don't need that because you're needless to say. I sound like a broken record. Who cares? It doesn't matter. Hey guys, it's Phantom here, and he just wants you to say, needless to say. And if you can comment that in the comment section below, I'll know that you got to the end of this video. Yeah. No, but seriously guys, I feel like I always hear that in a story. Like at some point in the story, they just end it with needless to say, or at the beginning of the story they go, needless to say, the cat got lost in the bag, you know? It's just kind of funny to me that I hear that, but I mean, there's nothing wrong with a story that flows like that. If you want to put needless to say in a story, that's fine with me. I don't have an issue with that at all. I just thought it was funny that a lot of stories that I read just say needless to say. And if you guys want to comment, like, share, and subscribe, that will be pretty cool. Anyway, guys, I love the collection of stories in this video, and I would love to hear from you. So be sure to comment below, you know, as usual. But, you know, that's all I have to say, really. So good night, good morning. I love you guys, and I'll see you in the next video. Share this video like a sore thumb, I guess. I don't know.